Hey friends, I recently noticed that almost 80% of viewers who enjoy these videos haven't subscribed yet. If you like the stories and want to see more, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement makes a huge difference and helps these stories reach more people. Thanks so much for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. I'd love to know. What if the most photographed woman in the world never truly left? What if her final journey wasn't to that small island grave, but back through the corridors where she once played as a child? Today, we investigate the haunting return of Princess Diana to Althorp House, not as memory, but as presence. On the 31st of August 1997, the world stopped when news broke of Diana's death in a Paris tunnel. But for those who work and live at Althorp House, the Spencer family estate in Northamptonshire, that wasn't the end of her story. Within months of her burial on the estate's island, staff began reporting impossible encounters. A woman in white by the lake at dawn, the scent of her signature perfume in rooms she loved, footsteps in her childhood bedroom when no one was there. These aren't ghost stories whispered around campfires. These are documented testimonies from groundskeepers, housekeepers, security personnel, and even members of the Spencer family themselves. What you're about to hear comes from sealed incident reports, private interviews, and decades of supernatural occurrences at one of England's most haunted estates. The 31st of August 1997, 12:23 a.m. The Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris became the site of the most photographed death in modern history. The Mercedes S-280 carrying Princess Diana, Dodi Fayed, and their driver Henri Paul collided with the 13th pillar at an estimated 65 miles per hour. By 4 a.m., doctors at Pitié, Salpêtrière Hospital pronounced Diana dead from internal injuries. She was 36 years old. The world didn't just mourn it convulsed. Television networks cancelled programming. Radio stations played somber music. Strangers wept openly in the streets of London, Paris, New York, Tokyo. Outside Kensington Palace, the sea of flowers grew so vast it could be seen from aircraft. The grief was unprecedented, irrational, almost supernatural in its intensity. Millions mourned a woman they'd never met, as if they'd lost their own sister, their own friend. But while the world processed its collective shock, Diana's brother Charles Spencer faced an impossible decision: where to lay his sister to rest. The traditional choice would have been the Spencer family crypt at Street Mary the Virgin Church in Great Brinkton, where generations of Spencers had been interred since the 16th century. But Charles rejected this immediately. The official reason, stated publicly, was security. The grave would become a circus, he argued. Crowds would overwhelm the small village. Diana deserved peace, not perpetual spectacle. Those close to the family whispered darker motivations. Charles had reportedly consulted with someone described only as a spiritual advisor in the days following Diana's death. The advice given was stark and strange. Diana's spirit was too powerful for the family crypt. She would disturb the others who rested there. The island, the advisor suggested, would contain her energy. The water surrounding it would serve as a boundary. Whether Charles believed this or simply used it to justify his decision remains unclear. But the choice was made. Diana would be buried on the small island in the Oval Lake, the place where she'd sought refuge as a lonely teenager, the only spot at Althorp where she'd ever felt truly safe. The 6th of September 1997. The funeral itself was a global event, Westminster Abbey filled with royalty, celebrities, and politicians, while an estimated 2.5 billion people watched on television. But what happened later that day, during the private family burial at Althorp, was witnessed by fewer than 20 people. And every single one of them saw something impossible. The coffin was carried across the narrow footbridge to the island just after 6 p.m. The pallbearers, Diana's brothers, Charles and Lord Fellows, along with close family friends, later described an immediate change in atmosphere as they approached the water. The lake's surface became perfectly, impossibly still. No ripples, no movement, not even the faint disturbance that wind creates on water. One pallbearer, speaking years later on condition of anonymity, described it as unnatural, as if the water itself were holding its breath, waiting. They continued forward, feet echoing on the wooden bridge. Several reported feeling watched, though the estate had been cleared of all non-family members. One man described the sensation as 1,000 eyes on us, but from somewhere we couldn't see. Then, just as the coffin reached the burial site on the island, the wind came. It swept across the estate, with sudden, violent force powerful enough to extinguish the memorial candles despite their protective glass enclosures, strong enough to tear petals from the flower arrangements and send them spiraling into the lake. Yet when staff members checked with the groundskeepers stationed at the estate's perimeter, they reported no wind at all. The phenomenon was localized entirely to the lake and its immediate surroundings. The burial continued, but the air felt wrong. Diana's sister Sarah later described it in a private letter. The air felt thick, electric, like we were being welcomed by something unseen. I know how mad that sounds, but we all felt it, every single one of us. Within 15 minutes, Diana's coffin was lowered into the ground. The island was her childhood sanctuary. Now it would be her eternal home. The estate management expected a period of mourning, then a gradual return to normal operations. They were catastrophically wrong. September 7th. The day after the burial, the estate's security logs noted the first anomaly. Motion sensors triggered in the West Wing at 3:47 a.m. Security investigated. All rooms were empty. All doors remained locked from the outside. September 8th. 3 separate motion sensor alerts between 2 and 5 a.m. All in areas connected to Diana's childhood. Her former bedroom, the corridor outside it, the staircase she would have used daily. September 9th. A housekeeper arrived to find Diana's childhood bedroom window ajar, curtains open. She was certain she'd locked it the previous evening. Security confirmed. No signs of forced entry. The locks were intact. By September 13th, 5 staff members had submitted written reports of unusual experiences to the estate manager, a man named Richard Blackwell, who'd overseen Althorp's operations for 17 years. His private journal, later leaked to investigators, reveals his growing concern. September 10, 3rd night of sensor alerts. Maintenance checked all equipment functioning perfectly. No explanation for triggers. September 12, staff reporting unease near the lake. Several requesting schedule changes to avoid early morning shifts. Temperature readings near the water inexplicably lower than surrounding areas, sometimes by 15 degrees. September 13. Something has fundamentally changed here. I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in what I'm seeing documented. We need to start keeping detailed records of everything. The growing unease wasn't limited to security systems and temperature readings. Staff members began sharing experiences they'd initially kept private. Footsteps heard in empty corridors, doors that wouldn't stay closed. The persistent scent of First by Van Cleef and Arpels perfume in rooms where no one had been. Within 2 weeks of Diana's burial, Althorp House had transformed from an English country estate into something else entirely, a place where the boundary between past and present, between life and death, had grown dangerously thin. 28 years have passed since that September. In that time, over 200 documented incidents have been logged by estate staff, investigated by paranormal researchers, and experienced by visitors from around the world. The witnesses include practical groundskeepers, skeptical security guards, hardened journalists, and even members of the Spencer family itself. Why examine this now? Because the evidence has reached critical mass, because the encounters continue. Because the question demands answering. Is Princess Diana's spirit truly present at Althorp House, or have grief and collective need created a shared delusion so powerful it generates physical phenomena? The testimonies you're about to hear are real. The incidents are documented. The witnesses are credible. What you make of them is your choice. But to understand why Diana's spirit might walk these halls, why her presence feels so different from the other ghosts reported here, we must first understand something crucial. Althorp House was never ordinary ground. Long before Diana Spencer was born, long before any Spencer set foot on this estate, something dark took root here. To understand Diana's haunting, we must first understand the cursed ground she's buried in. The story of Althorp's haunting doesn't begin with Princess Diana. It doesn't even begin with the Spencers. To understand why this estate has become one of England's most supernaturally active locations, we must travel back nearly 8 centuries, to a time when the land was known by a different name and served a very different purpose. In 1247, Benedictine monks established a small monastery on what is now the Althorp estate. The Northamptonshire countryside seemed ideal: rolling hills, fresh water sources, fertile soil for growing crops. The monks built their church and dormitory with stones quarried from the surrounding area, established gardens, and began their contemplative life of prayer and work. Within 3 years, the monastery was abandoned. Parish records from Street Mary the Virgin Church in Great Brington tell the story in stark, disturbing detail. Between November 1249 and February 1250, a single winter, 18 monks died. Not from plague, which would have been noted specifically in medieval chronicles. Not from famine, as the harvest that year had been adequate. The records use language that medieval scribes reserved for supernatural causes, a darkness that consumed their souls. Brother Timothy, the only surviving monk, gave testimony before the Bishop of Peterborough in March 1250. His account, preserved in the diocese archives, describes monks who stopped sleeping, claiming, "The ground beneath us cries out." They reported hearing voices in the night, seeing shadows that moved against the light, experiencing what Brother Timothy called a great pressing upon the chest, as if the earth itself wished to drag us down. The monastery was demolished in 1251, but here's the critical detail that connects that medieval horror to the present. When the Spencers built the current Althorp House between 1508 and 1688, they incorporated the monastery's foundation stones into the new structure. The very bones of that cursed ground became part of the house where Diana would one day sleep, play, and eventually return to in death. Local legend has maintained for 8 centuries that the land itself is cursed. Medieval theology recognized certain places as thin spots, locations where the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds grew dangerously permeable. Whether through geological accident or deliberate evil, some places became doorways. And once opened, such doorways rarely closed. When the Spencer family acquired the estate in 1508, they inherited more than land and titles. They inherited a legacy of darkness that would claim Spencer blood across 5 centuries. The Red Drawing Room murder of 1603 set the pattern. Sir John Spencer, consumed by jealousy and rage, stabbed his wife Catherine 17 times after discovering her affair with a household servant. The murder occurred during the Christmas feast, in front of 20 guests. Catherine died on the drawing room floor, her blood soaking into the floorboards. Sir John was never prosecuted. Familial power and wealth ensured silence. But the room itself never forgot. Staff members who worked at Althorp in subsequent centuries reported the drawing room door would not stay closed. The smell of blood would manifest on certain nights, particularly around Christmas. Temperature readings in that room consistently measured 15 to 20 degrees colder than adjacent spaces, with no architectural explanation. The Red Drawing Room was eventually sealed in the 1890 seconds, but the horror it contained had already seeped into the house's foundation. In the 1700s, a servant named William Marsh was accused of stealing silver from the estate. Rather than prosecute publicly, the Spencer lord of that era chose a medieval punishment. William was walled up alive in the basement wine cellar. His screams were reportedly heard for 3 days before silence finally came. The wine cellar became forbidden space. Later generations of Spencers refused to enter it. Estate plans from the Victorian era show the cellar entrance sealed with brick, but servants reported hearing scratching sounds from behind the wall and the persistent sound of someone begging for water. Then there was Lady Georgiana Spencer, born at Althorp in 1757. Beautiful, intelligent, politically connected, she became the Duchess of Devonshire through marriage and one of the most famous women of the 18th century. But fame brought tragedy, crushing gambling debts, a forced menage a trois with her husband and his mistress, Lady Elizabeth Foster, and eventual exile from her own children. Georgiana died at 48, broken by scandal and disappointment. According to estate records dating back to the early 1800s, her spirit has walked the long library ever since forever, searching through books, as if looking for answers she never found in life. Staff members describe her apparition as frantic, desperate, pulling volumes from shelves and leaving them scattered on the floor. A pattern emerges across 5 centuries: violent death, betrayal, grief, despair, all layered into the estate like geological strata. Each tragedy adding to the weight of darkness pressing up from that cursed medieval ground. The question paranormal investigators have long debated: does Althorp House trap spirits, preventing them from moving on? Or does it attract them, drawing tortured souls to a place where the barrier between worlds remains permanently thin? But of all the spirits reported at Althorp, one predates even the Spencer tragedies. The Grey Lady has been documented since 1611, making her one of the oldest, consistently reported hauntings in England. She appears in Tudor-era dress, the fashion of 1485 to 1603, suggesting she died during that period, possibly during the estate's early Spencer ownership. No historical record identifies who she was in life. She exists only as presence, as witness, as eternal mourner. The Grey Lady appears almost exclusively on the grand staircase, and always in the same manner, descending from the upper floor, moving with slow, deliberate steps. Witnesses describe her face as a mask of profound sorrow, frozen in an expression of grief so intense it seems to transcend individual pain and become universal suffering itself. But here's the detail that has chilled witnesses for over 4 centuries: she never reaches the bottom step. As the Grey Lady descends, she simply fades not gradually, but as if falling through the floor into some realm below the physical house. Some witnesses describe it as watching someone sink into dark water. Others say she seems to be pulled downward by invisible hands. Margaret Whitworth, who worked as head housekeeper at Althorp for 37 years, encountered the Grey Lady on the evening of the 15th of March, 1983. Margaret had just finished securing the main reception rooms and was heading toward the servants' quarters when she saw the figure at the top of the grand staircase. "I thought at first it was someone in fancy dress," Margaret recalled in a 1985 interview with a local historian. "We sometimes had costume parties at the estate. But something about her was wrong. The dress looked real, not a costume, and she moved strangely, like she was walking through water rather than air." Margaret called out, asking if the woman needed assistance. The figure didn't respond. It continued its slow descent, and as Margaret watched from the bottom of the staircase, the Grey Lady reached the 3rd step from the bottom and simply vanished. "Not walked away," Margaret insisted. "Vanished. One moment solid, the next moment gone, like she'd fallen through the floor. I felt cold air rush past me, and I smelled something like old earth, like a grave." Margaret refused to use that staircase alone at night for the remainder of her employment. What researchers find particularly significant: the Grey Lady's appearances correlate with times of family crisis. She was seen multiple times during Lady Georgiana's final illness in 1806. She appeared to servants the night before the announcement of the 7th Earl Spencer's death in 1975. And according to staff logs, she was seen 3 times in the week following Princess Diana's death in 1997. It's as if she serves as harbinger, witness, or perhaps greeter welcoming the newly dead into Althorp's eternal gathering. After 5 centuries of tragedy, something happened to Althorp House. Staff members who've worked there for decades describe it not as a building, but as a presence, something aware, something responsive, something that remembers. Dorothy Mills, estate librarian from 1982 to 1997, described it this way: "The house reacts to emotional events. When Princess Diana's divorce was announced, Doors throughout the west wing where her childhood bedroom was located wouldn't stay closed. We'd secure them, and within hours they'd be standing open again. It was as if the house itself was expressing distress. Rooms appear to hold memory, trauma imprints on walls, floorboards, air itself. Of Althorp's 90 rooms, certain spaces carry demonstrably heavier atmospheres. Visitors report feeling watched in the red drawing room. The basement cellar, when it can be accessed, creates feelings of claustrophobia and panic in almost everyone who enters. The long library generates profound sadness, particularly near the section where Georgiana's ghost is most frequently seen. These aren't subjective impressions. Thermal imaging has documented unexplained cold spots in these locations. Electromagnetic field readers show spikes with no identifiable source. The house itself seems to hold charge, like a battery storing centuries of emotional energy. This matters for understanding Diana's haunting. She didn't die at Althorp, she died in Paris, yet her spirit manifests most powerfully at the estate. Why? Because Diana Spencer grew up surrounded by these ghosts. She slept in rooms where spirits walked. She played in corridors where the dead still mourned. And perhaps most significantly, they knew her. Diana wasn't returning to neutral ground when she was buried on that island. She was joining a centuries-old congregation of the dead, entering a house that had been waiting for her, in a place where the boundary between life and death had been broken 800 years before she was born. The cursed ground was ready. The house was ready. The Grey Lady was ready. All that remained was for Diana to come home. The divorce was finalized in April 1969. By summer, 8-year-old Diana Spencer and her siblings had moved permanently to Althorp House. Their mother, Frances, had left to marry another man. Their father, Earl Spencer, retreated into emotional distance, leaving the children to navigate their abandonment largely alone. Diana was assigned a bedroom in the west wing, overlooking the oval lake. Large windows framed the water view. Generations of Spencer children had slept in that room. Some of them, according to estate records, had died there. The first night, Diana refused to sleep alone. "The lady in grey visits me," she told her nanny, a practical woman named Janet Thompson who'd raised Spencer children for 2 decades. Janet dismissed it as nightmares, the predictable result of divorce trauma and adjustment to a new home. She sat with Diana until the child fell asleep, then returned to her own quarters. At 2:30 a.m., Diana's screaming woke the entire West Wing. Janet found her standing on the bed, pointing at the corner of the room, sobbing that she was here, she was crying, she wanted to tell me something, but couldn't speak. The corner was empty. Janet checked for intruders, finding nothing. She attributed the episode to stress and grief. But the episodes continued. Night after night, Diana reported seeing the lady in grey, sometimes in her bedroom, sometimes in the corridor outside, always weeping, always trying to speak without sound. Years later, Charles Spencer would reveal something that Janet Thompson never knew. Diana's descriptions were unnervingly, impossibly detailed. She described the Grey Lady's dress with precision: the high Tudor collar, the specific cut of the bodice, the way the fabric gathered at the waist. These weren't details an 8-year-old in 1969 would know from television or books. Historical costume wasn't part of popular culture then, and Diana hadn't yet studied history in school. More disturbingly, Diana drew pictures of the ghost. Her childhood sketches, preserved in family archives, show a woman in accurate Tudor-era fashion, the kind of accuracy that requires either historical research or direct observation. She knew things about the house no child should know. She told her brother that people died in the red drawing room before anyone had told her the room's history. She refused to go near the basement stairs, claiming she could hear the man in the walls crying for water, a detail matching the story of William Marsh, walled up alive 2 centuries earlier. That story wasn't common knowledge among staff, and certainly wasn't shared with children. One night in 1971, when Diana was 10, she woke screaming louder than ever. When Janet reached her, Diana was hyperventilating, barely able to speak. "She wants to tell me something but can't speak," Diana sobbed. "She keeps pointing at the floor, like she's falling. She's so sad. She's always so sad." Staff members who worked at Althorp during the 1970 seconds, interviewed years later, consistently described young Diana as different from her siblings. Lady Diana was sensitive, recalled Thomas Patterson, a groundskeeper from that era. She'd go quiet in certain rooms, like she was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. She sensed things. The family eventually consulted a child psychologist, concerned about Diana's persistent hallucinations. The psychologist found nothing clinically wrong. Diana was grieving her mother's absence, certainly, but she wasn't delusional or schizophrenic. The doctor suggested the ghost stories were a coping mechanism, a way of externalizing her own sadness by projecting it onto imaginary figures. But paranormal researchers offer a different explanation. Trauma, particularly childhood trauma, can heighten sensitivity to supernatural phenomena. Emotional vulnerability creates openness to non-physical stimuli that others filter out. Diana's profound grief over her mother's abandonment, combined with the house's already thin veil between worlds, may have made her receptive to presences that had walked those halls for centuries. The Grey Lady wasn't visiting Diana. Diana had simply become able to see what had always been there. As Diana grew older, her sensitivity manifested in stranger ways. She became obsessed with the estate's darkest spaces, specifically the rooms associated with violent death. The Red Drawing Room had been kept locked since the late 1800s, but Diana would stand outside its door for long periods, silent and still. Her brother Charles once found her there, ear pressed against the wood. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Listening," Diana replied. "I can hear them fighting." Charles heard nothing, but Diana insisted. Angry voices, a woman pleading, the sound of something heavy falling. All of it coming from the sealed room where Sir John Spencer had murdered his wife in 1603. The basement wine cellar held similar fascination. Diana refused to descend the stairs, but she'd sit at the top step, listening. She had recurring nightmares about the man in the walls, dreams of someone trapped in darkness, crying for water, scratching at stone until his fingers bled. Why was a child drawn to such darkness? Psychologists might argue she was processing her own trauma through the house's history, finding comfort in knowing others had suffered as she suffered. Abandoned children seeking abandoned spirits, a kinship with the dead that the living couldn't provide. Diana recognized her own grief in the house's accumulated tragedy. The Grey Lady's endless mourning mirrored her own. The murdered wife's betrayal echoed her mother's departure. The entombed servant's desperate isolation reflected Diana's emotional abandonment by her father. She wasn't afraid of the ghosts. She understood them. Perhaps, on some level, she felt she belonged with them more than with the living. By her teenage years, Diana had found one place at Althorp where the darkness lifted, the island in the oval lake. She would spend hours there, accessible only by the narrow footbridge, surrounded by water and trees. She read, wrote in journals, cried without witnesses. Friends who visited remember Diana calling the island the only place I feel safe. The significance wasn't lost on those familiar with folklore. Water, in traditional belief, is a barrier spirits cannot cross. Islands surrounded by water are sanctuaries from supernatural influence. Whether Diana knew this consciously or intuited it, she'd found the one spot on the estate where the weight of centuries didn't press down on her. The irony would become unbearable. The place where Diana felt safest from the dead became her burial site. The refuge that had protected her from ghosts became where she joined them. When Charles Spencer chose the island for her grave, he may have believed he was honouring her love for that sanctuary. But some who knew Diana's history wonder if he trapped her there surrounded by water, prevented from fully manifesting elsewhere on the estate. Or perhaps Diana chose it herself, long before she died. Perhaps the island was always waiting for her, and some part of her always knew she would return to it. Not as a living child seeking escape, but as a spirit seeking the only home she'd ever truly known. The child who saw ghosts had become one, and Althorp House, which had known her since she was 8 years old, welcomed her back into its eternal congregation. The transformation from woman to spirit happened at precisely 4 a.m. Paris time on the 31st of August 1997. Doctors at Salpêtrière Hospital made the pronouncement, but the world felt it before the official announcement. Something fundamental had shifted in the collective consciousness, a presence that billions had felt, even at a distance, had suddenly vanished from the physical world. The grief was unprecedented. Not since the assassination of John F. Kennedy had the world united in such visceral mourning. But this was different, more intimate, more personal. Diana had been called the People's Princess, not as political title, but as emotional truth. Strangers felt they knew her. Her pain had been their pain, her death became their loss. Charles Spencer faced his decision amid this global convulsion of grief. Where to bury the most famous woman in the world? The obvious choice, the Spencer family crypt at St. Mary the Virgin Church, was rejected immediately. The official reason stated to the press: security. The village of Great Brington couldn't handle the crowds. Diana's grave would become a perpetual spectacle, exactly what she'd spent her life trying to escape. But those close to the family knew there was another reason, one that would sound insane if spoken publicly. Charles Spencer had consulted someone about more than logistics. The testimony came years later from a family friend, speaking on condition of anonymity to a paranormal investigator. The details have never been officially confirmed, but multiple independent sources tell the same story. Between September 1st and 3rd, Charles Spencer met privately with a noted medium, a woman who'd worked with the Spencer family before, though never publicly acknowledged. She'd been consulted during previous family crises, always discreetly, always deniably. Her warning was stark. Diana's spirit is too powerful. If you place her in the family crypt, she will disturb the others who rest there. The energy of her death, the violence, the global grief it's created, something extraordinary. She needs to be contained. The medium allegedly suggested the island specifically. The water will contain her energy. It will give her space to settle, to adjust to her new state. Think of it as a transition space between worlds. Charles reportedly asked the obvious question: contained or trapped? The medium's answer was ambiguous. Both. Neither. It depends on what Diana's spirit chooses to do. This raises disturbing questions. Did Charles Spencer fear his sister's ghost, or was he trying to protect her spirit, giving her the sanctuary she'd sought in life? The island had always been Diana's refuge, the place she felt safest. Burial there could be seen as honoring that memory. Or it could be seen as something darker, using water's traditional power to bind spirits, preventing Diana from fully manifesting, containing something he feared might be too powerful to coexist with. The truth may lie somewhere between compassion and fear, protection and imprisonment. What's certain is this: Charles chose the island knowing its supernatural significance, and what happened at the funeral suggests his concerns were justified. The public ceremony at Westminster Abbey was watched by 2.5 billion people, but what happened hours later at Althorp was witnessed by fewer than 20, and every single one saw something that defied natural explanation. The coffin was carried to the island just after 6 p.m. The pallbearers Charles Spencer, Lord Fellows, and close family friends approached the footbridge with the weight of oak and lead and the remains of a princess. As they stepped onto the bridge, the lake's surface changed. It became perfectly, impossibly still. No ripples from the breeze that had been blowing moments before. No disturbance from insects or fish. The water looked like glass, like a mirror, like something frozen though the September evening was warm. It was as if the lake itself were holding its breath, one witness later testified, waiting for something. The pallbearers continued forward. Several reported feeling watched not by the small gathering of family, but by something else, something they couldn't see but could undeniably sense. One man described it as 1,000 eyes on us, but from somewhere beyond the physical. The footbridge echoed with their steps, the only sound in the absolute silence. Then, just as the coffin reached the burial site on the island, the wind came. It swept across the estate with shocking violence, powerful enough to extinguish the memorial candles despite their protective glass enclosures. Strong enough to tear petals from the elaborate flower arrangements and send them spiraling into the lake like snow. The vicar conducting the service grabbed his prayer book, as pages tore loose. Women's hair whipped across their faces. Men steadied themselves against the sudden force. Yet when estate security, stationed at the perimeter, was contacted later, they reported no wind at all. The phenomenon was localized entirely to the lake and its immediate surroundings, a circle perhaps 100 yards in diameter, beyond which the air remained still. The wind lasted perhaps 30 seconds, then it stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the gathering in shocked silence. "We felt something watching us, something powerful," a pallbearer said years later, still reluctant to be identified. "It wasn't threatening exactly, but it was immense, like standing next to something vast that you can't quite see." Diana's sister Sarah later described the atmosphere. "The air felt thick, electric, like the moment before a lightning strike. We all felt it. No one wanted to say it out loud, but we all knew something impossible had just happened." Even the vicar conducting the service reportedly paused mid-prayer, looking around nervously, as if sensing a presence among the living mourners. The burial continued. Diana's coffin was lowered into the ground. The child who had seen ghosts, the woman who had become a global icon, was now part of the cursed ground she'd grown up on. And immediately, Althorp House began to change. September 7th. Estate manager Richard Blackwell attempted to return operations to normal. The house needed to be secured, maintained, prepared for the family's ongoing grief. He assigned staff their usual duties and hoped for routine. The security logs told a different story. 3:47 a.m. Motion sensors triggered in the west wing, 3rd floor. Security investigated. All rooms empty, all doors locked from outside. September 8th. 3 separate alerts between 2 and 5 a.m., all in areas connected to Diana's childhood. The patterns were too specific to ignore. September 9th. A housekeeper found Diana's childhood bedroom window open, curtains drawn back. She was certain she'd secured everything the previous evening. Security confirmed no signs of forced entry. By September 10th, staff were requesting schedule changes. No one wanted early morning shifts. No one wanted to work alone in the West Wing. Richard Blackwell's private journal, leaked to investigators years later, documents his growing alarm. September 8. 3rd motion sensor alert tonight. Maintenance checked all equipment this morning, everything functioning perfectly. No explanation for the triggers. Staff reporting bad feelings, but nothing concrete. September 10. 5 staff members requesting schedule changes to avoid early shifts. 2 citing family obligations, but I know fear when I see it. The temperature readings near the lake are inexplicable, 15 degrees colder than surrounding areas, with no meteorological explanation. September 12. Something has fundamentally changed here. I've worked at Althorp for 17 years. I know this house, and I'm telling you it's different now. Everyone feels it. No one wants to admit it. The tension built like pressure before an explosion. Motion sensors, unlocked doors, temperature anomalies, the scent of first perfume in empty rooms, footsteps where no one walked. Everyone felt it. No one said it. And then came September 9th, the day Thomas Brennan saw her standing on the island, solid and real and impossible, raising one hand in greeting before vanishing like extinguished flame. The haunting had begun in earnest. Diana Spencer had returned to Althorp House, not as memory, as presence. Thomas Brennan was not the kind of man who saw things. Head gardener at Althorp since 1995, former Royal Marines, 53 years old. His job was maintenance, not mystery. He pruned hedges, monitored drainage systems, ensured the grounds remained immaculate. He'd served in the Falklands. He didn't believe in ghosts. His daily routine never varied. 5:30 a.m. perimeter walk, checking for overnight storm damage, animal intrusions, structural issues around Oval Lake. September 9th, 1997 began like any other morning. Clear sky, early autumn chill, good visibility. Thomas would later testify, voice steady despite the impossibility of his words. I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't possible. He was checking the footbridge, the same bridge that had borne Diana's coffin 3 days earlier, when movement caught his peripheral vision. A figure on the island, standing near the burial site. His first thought, trespasser, security breach. He cupped his hands and called out, "Hello, how did you get past security?" The figure turned to face him. Distance, 40 feet. Clear line of sight. Morning mist rising from the lake, but the figure was perfectly visible. Recognition hit him like physical impact. Princess Diana. Not as she'd been at 36, but younger, radiant, perhaps 25. The smile from her wedding photographs. White dress, simple and elegant, moving slightly in a breeze Thomas couldn't feel. His mind scrambled for rational explanation. Look-alike, intruder, hallucination brought on by grief and lack of sleep. But he knew her face. Everyone in Britain knew that face. Lady Diana? His voice cracked. She looked directly at him. Eye contact, undeniable and deliberate. Then she raised one hand, palm forward, a greeting, an acknowledgement, something, and vanished. Not turning away, not walking into the trees. Gone. Like someone switched off a light, he'd later describe it. One moment solid and real, the next moment empty air. Thomas stood frozen, clipboard forgotten. He checked his watch. 5:47 a.m. He was fully awake. He was sober. The morning was clear. He'd just seen a dead woman. He ran back to the estate office, breath ragged, and burst through the door. "I just saw Lady Diana." Estate manager Richard Blackwell's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Thomas, sit down. It's the grief. We're all on the island. 5:47. White dress." She looked at me, she waved. Blackwell made a note in the daily log, but his tone was gentle, pitying. "Go home early, Thomas. Take care of yourself." Thomas went home. His wife suggested seeing a doctor. He refused. He knew what he'd seen. He returned to work the next day, but avoided the lake. September 10th. A housekeeper mentioned something strange near the West Wing. September 11th. Security reported persistent motion sensor failures around the lake. September 12th. The head cook described feeling watched in areas connected to Diana's childhood. By September 13th, 5 staff members had reported unusual experiences, all near the lake, all in Diana's former spaces. Richard Blackwell stopped dismissing reports and started documenting them. The incident log grew, 15 entries by month's end, 32 by October's close, 47 by November. The pattern was undeniable. Diana Spencer hadn't just returned to Althorp House. She was making herself known. The pattern wasn't random. As autumn turned to winter, the manifestations became more specific, more deliberate. Diana wasn't just present, she was communicating. November 12th, 1997. Housekeeper Carol Preston arrived at Diana's childhood bedroom for routine maintenance. She'd personally locked the windows the previous evening, drawn the curtains closed. The curtains were open, the window stood ajar. Her first thought, security breach. Then she smelled it. First by Van Cleef and Arpels. Diana's signature perfume. Overwhelming, fresh, as if someone had just applied it seconds before. Carol searched the room. No perfume bottle, no source. On the nightstand, a single white rose. Fresh, dew-covered, perfect condition. But roses didn't bloom at Althorp in November. No vases nearby, no water source. The rose looked placed, not fallen. Security found no signs of forced entry. The perfume lingered for 3 hours, then vanished completely. A botanist later examined the rose. The species didn't grow in England. The bedroom became a focal point. Carol stopped cleaning alone. The long library housed over 10,000 volumes. Estate librarian Dorothy Mills had maintained it for 15 years. She knew every book, every shelf. December 1997. She was working alone when a loud crash echoed from the restricted section. She found The Prophet by Khalil Gibran on the floor, open to a specific passage about death being merely a continuation of life. The book had been secured on a high shelf, with no reason to fall. December 15th. Sonnets from the Portuguese, open to How Do I Love Thee. December 22nd. A biography of Mary, Queen of Scots, open to the execution chapter. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Books about grief, betrayal, death. By January, books about motherhood began appearing, always carefully selected, messages unmistakable. Dorothy started documenting everything: date, time, title, page. By March 1998, she'd logged 23 incidents, every book thematically linked to Diana's life. Theory: Diana was telling her story through others' words. February 1998. A visitor touring the estate heard singing from St. Mary's Chapel, "I Vow to Thee, My Country," the hymn from Diana's funeral. The chapel was locked. Security investigated and found it empty, doors secured. The singing continued. A guard recorded audio on his personal device. Later analysis identified a female voice, British accent, matching Diana's vocal range. By March, multiple reports confirmed the phenomenon. Always the same hymn, always when the chapel was empty. Security installed cameras. They captured audio but showed only empty space. Audio forensics confirmed. Single female voice, no electronic generation. Source location: center of the chapel, where Diana's family had sat during the funeral service. Summer 1998. When the estate opened to visitors, something unexpected emerged. Photographs. Multiple visitors, different cameras, different dates, all capturing the same anomaly. A translucent figure in white, always near the Memorial Temple or Island Bridge. Always facing the lake toward the burial site. Paranormal investigators reviewed the evidence, consistent with spirit manifestation. Security footage revealed more. Luminous orbs near the island, moving with apparent intelligence. They avoided obstacles, followed pathways, movement patterns matching Diana's childhood walking routes documented in family photographs. Professional photographers attempted to debunk the images. They couldn't. No lens flares, no double exposures, no technical explanation. Something was present in those images that shouldn't exist. By year's end, the incident log contained 47 documented occurrences. Diana wasn't haunting Althorp House. She was inhabiting it. For 2 years, the Spencer family maintained public silence. Privately, they were living with the undeniable. 1999. An estate insurance dispute required documentation of unusual activity affecting property value and security operations. Charles Spencer gave a sealed deposition, standard legal procedure meant to remain confidential. It leaked to paranormal investigators 3 years later. The admissions were extraordinary. His children refused to play near the lake. When pressed for explanation, they said simply, "Aunt Diana watches us." They described a woman in white, waving from the island, appearing and disappearing without warning. Charles's wife reported multiple bedroom encounters, waking to find Diana standing at the foot of their bed, not threatening, never moving. Just standing there with an expression she described as infinite sadness. Charles himself had seen her in the grand hall, Diana's apparition walking toward the entrance, as if leaving for an engagement, fading before reaching the door. Most revealing, Charles had hired 3 separate paranormal investigators. All 3 reached identical conclusions. Althorp housed multiple spirit entities. Diana's presence was strongest by far. The first investigator used electromagnetic field detection equipment. Readings near the island showed spikes consistent with high-energy manifestation. His conclusion: she's trying to communicate but can't break through fully. There's frustration in the energy signature. The second investigator, a psychic medium, claimed direct contact. Messages received, concern for her sons, unfinished business, overwhelming urgency. Diana allegedly wanted to protect her family from the same fate, cryptic words that terrified Charles Spencer more than any apparition. The third investigator took a scientific approach: data collection, pattern analysis, peer-reviewed methodology. His conclusion was stark. genuine paranormal activity beyond reasonable doubt. He documented temperature anomalies dropping 15 degrees in seconds, electromagnetic spikes with no natural source, audio phenomena captured on multiple devices, all centered on Diana-related locations. The combined assessment was unanimous. Althorp was experiencing an authentic haunting. Diana's spirit was the most active, the most powerful, not malevolent, but intensely emotional, attempting communication across a dimensional barrier she couldn't quite breach. Charles Spencer faced an impossible choice. The church offered exorcism services. Several priests volunteered, experienced in spiritual cleansing. But the risks were significant, potentially angering the spirit, incomplete clearing, and worst of all, publicity. The press would destroy them. The alternative, accept the haunting as permanent. Allow Diana to remain in the home she'd loved. From the leaked documents, Charles's reasoning was clear. If Diana wants to be here, this is her home. We have no right to force her away. The family voted. The decision was unanimous. No exorcism. Estate management was trained to document phenomena, not interfere. Staff received briefings, report what you see, don't engage, don't provoke. The public was never informed of the true extent. Official statements remained vague. Some visitors report unusual feelings near the memorial. The reality, an active, ongoing, powerful haunting that showed no signs of diminishing. The Spencer children experienced Diana's presence more acutely than any adult. They refused to enter specific areas. Aunt Diana's rooms became forbidden territory by their own choice, not parental mandate. Charles's daughter, 7 years old, told her father, "She's sad and wants to tell us something." His son, age 5, suffered nightmares about the pretty lady by the water who can't talk. Family friends visiting with their own children noticed a pattern. The young ones saw her more easily than adults. A 6-year-old guest casually mentioned the nice lady in the garden, who matched Diana's description perfectly. His parents had seen nothing. Was it children's natural sensitivity to the supernatural? Or was Diana showing herself to children specifically attempting to communicate with the next generation of Spencers? Protecting them or warning them? The question remained unanswered, but the encounters continued, documented in private journals and whispered family conversations. Diana was trapped between worlds, and she was desperate to be heard. Diana wasn't just haunting Althorp, she was working. June 2001, Margaret Thornton visited the memorial 3 months after her husband's death. Diana's public compassion had inspired the pilgrimage, a widow seeking solace from the memory of a princess who'd comforted so many. Standing near the temple, Margaret's grief overwhelmed her. She began crying uncontrollably, alone among the tourists. Then she felt it, a hand on her shoulder. Firm, warm, real. She turned. No one was nearby. A voice in her ear, clear and gentle. "You're not alone. You will survive this." British, feminine, unmistakably compassionate. Margaret recognized it from news footage. Diana's voice. Overwhelming comfort flooded through her. The grief didn't vanish, but became bearable. She reported the experience to estate staff, shaken but profoundly changed. Her testimony was filed with others. A pattern was emerging. August 2003, Robert Chen, visiting from Singapore, was fighting a custody battle that was destroying him. The Althorp tour was meant as distraction. Near the temple, he broke down. Embarrassed, he tried to hide from other visitors. Then came the scent. First by Van Cleef and Arpels. Strong, immediate, impossible to miss. Accompanied by a feeling he struggled to articulate. Like a presence wrapped around me. Not physical, but emotional, pure empathy. Someone who'd suffered similarly was saying, "I understand." The experience lasted 5 minutes. Robert emerged fundamentally changed. He returned to Singapore, resolved his custody battle with new perspective, and later wrote to the estate, "Whatever happened that day saved my life." September 2008. Elena Kowalski made a pilgrimage from Poland after losing her teenage daughter in a car accident. Diana's compassion for mothers resonated with her unbearable grief. At the memorial temple, she suddenly saw her, a woman in white standing across the lake on the island, too far to see the face clearly, but the presence was unmistakable. The woman raised both arms in a gesture of embrace. Elena felt a spiritual hug from across the water, a message received without words. Your daughter is at peace. You will be too. The vision lasted 5 minutes. Other visitors saw nothing. Elena's husband witnessed only her face transforming from grief to peace. She returned to Poland and established a support group for bereaved parents, naming it Diana's Embrace. Paranormal researchers analyzing the testimonies found the pattern impossible to ignore. Diana's spirit appeared most consistently to the grieving, the traumatized, the abandoned people experiencing the pain she'd known intimately. Failed marriage, eating disorders, emotional abandonment, public compassion work with AIDS patients, landmine victims, the homeless. Theory: death hadn't stopped her mission, she was still healing the broken-hearted. A medium offered interpretation: Diana's spirit remained bound to earth by unfinished work. She couldn't rest while others suffered as she had. Althorp had become her base of operations. Skeptics proposed an alternative: grief and suggestion creating experiences. People wanted to feel Diana's presence, so they did. But the consistency was troubling. Different cultures, languages, backgrounds, witnesses with no prior connection to Diana describing identical experiences. The question remained: genuine spiritual activity or collective need given supernatural form? Either way, Diana was still the people's princess, still offering comfort to those who needed her most. The compassionate spirit offering comfort by day became something else entirely when the estate closed for winter. November through March. The public gone, only essential staff remaining: 3 security guards, 2 maintenance workers. This is when the phenomena intensified dramatically. November 2005. Security guard James Morrison walked his 2 a.m. patrol through the main corridor. A shadow figure moved ahead of him, solid enough to block light, passing through locked doors as if they didn't exist. Morrison followed at a distance. The figure entered the red drawing room site of a 1603 murder. He waited outside and heard voices. A woman pleading, a man shouting. The historical murder replaying itself, or Diana experiencing the house's accumulated memories. Morrison called backup. Both heard the phenomena. When they entered, the room was empty and freezing 34 degrees Fahrenheit, while the corridor maintained 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The cold was localized to that room only. The most disturbing phenomenon occurred with clockwork regularity. Between 3:45 and 4:15 a.m., guards reported identical experiences. A woman crying inconsolably, not sobbing, wailing. The sound echoed through corridors, impossible to locate, everywhere and nowhere at once. The timing was significant. Diana was pronounced dead at 4 a.m. Paris time, 3 a.m. British summer time. The crying occurred at her death hour. Guards described it as heartbroken and desperate. Unlike anything human, primal grief given voice. It came with temperature drops, electromagnetic interference, and overwhelming sadness that made some guards weep themselves. The most disturbing detail: the crying stopped abruptly when lights were turned on, as if Diana's spirit fled from exposure, or as if light disrupted the death replay. Several guards refused solo overnight shifts. The union filed complaints about working conditions. The estate increased staffing, no one alone after midnight. Winter 2010 to 2011 brought escalation. Motion sensors triggered constantly across multiple zones simultaneously. Security footage showed dark shapes moving too fast for human movement, appearing in multiple locations minutes apart. Locked rooms were accessed impossibly. Diana's childhood bedroom was found disturbed, furniture moved, drawers opened, no forced entry, items removed, childhood photos, diary pages. They were later found arranged in the grand hall, forming a timeline of Diana's life. Who was arranging them? Diana's spirit trying to tell her story, other house spirits interacting with hers, her spirit fragmented, reliving memories in pieces. Maintenance staff reported feeling watched from empty rooms, shadows in peripheral vision, the sense of multiple presences, not just Diana. Had her arrival awakened other spirits or attracted new entities? 28 years of activity. No clear answers. What is Diana trying to communicate? Messages through books, music, visions, but the core message remains unclear. Warning? Comfort? Cry for help? Why can't she rest? Unfinished business with her sons. The manner of her death? Her compassion mission incomplete? Is she alone among Althorp's spirits or trapped among them? Why the darkness? Comforting experiences during daylight, terrifying phenomena at night. The same spirit, or different aspects reflecting Diana's duality, public grace versus private suffering. What happens at 4 a.m.? The death hour crying is the most consistent phenomenon. Is she reliving trauma or trying to process it? Will it ever stop? And the island itself? Burial site or prison? Water traditionally binds spirits. Did Charles Spencer know this when he chose the location? Is Diana contained there or choosing to stay? The questions multiply. The answers remain beyond the veil. And every winter, when darkness falls and the estate empties, the crying begins again. 28 years of documentation, over 200 documented incidents, and those are only the ones officially recorded. The witnesses span every category imaginable. Estate staff who work the grounds daily, Spencer family members living with the reality, professional paranormal investigators with credentials and equipment, random visitors with no prior Diana connection, and children too young to have known the details they described. The physical evidence exists. Audio recordings of chapel singing, photographs with unexplained figures, temperature and electromagnetic field readings with no natural explanation. Security footage showing anomalies that technical experts cannot debunk. The consistency across testimonies is what skeptics struggle to explain away. The white dress, the first perfume scent, the specific locations: lake, bedroom, chapel. The timing patterns: 4 a.m. crying, winter intensification, death anniversary phenomena. Skeptical explanations have been attempted: grief-induced hallucination, power of suggestion, collective delusion, technical malfunctions causing false readings. But the skeptical model fails in critical ways. Too many independent witnesses separated by years and continents. Too much physical evidence captured on multiple devices. Too consistent over too long a period. Cross-cultural, cross-background consistency among people who've never met. Children's experiences without prior knowledge of Diana's life or death. Something is happening at Althorp House. The question is what? Fair consideration demands we examine the alternative view. Diana's cultural impact creates expectation. People visit Althorp wanting a supernatural experience. Their emotional state primes them for interpretation of ambiguous sensory data. The perfume scent could be olfactory hallucination, a trick of memory and grief. Shadow figures might be low-light pareidolia, the brain's tendency to see patterns in darkness. Sounds could be the acoustic properties of an old building settling, whined through corridors, pipes expanding and contracting. The photographs, lens flares, dust particles, technical artifacts that digital processing interprets as shapes. EMF readings, old electrical systems generating fields that modern equipment detects. Temperature drops, poor insulation, drafts, the natural cold pockets in ancient buildings. The psychological need for continued connection is powerful. Grief demands meaning, rejects finality. Diana's death was too tragic, too sudden, too unresolved to accept as ending. Creating a ghost allows continued relationship. The story becomes self-reinforcing. Each testimony influences the next. Expectation creates experience. Collective belief sustains the narrative. This view has merit. Grief is extraordinarily powerful. Human need for meaning shapes perception in ways we barely understand. But does this explain everything? Can it account for Thomas Brennan's sighting, Carol Preston's impossible rose, the audio recordings analysed by forensic experts? Those who've experienced Diana's presence carry zero doubt. Thomas Brennan, 28 years later. I know what I saw, never wavered, never recanted. Margaret Thornton, she saved me from despair. That wasn't imagination, that was intervention. Elena Kowalski. My daughter's death had meaning again after that day. You don't get that from suggestion. Carol Preston. That was Diana, in her home, checking on us like she always did. The professional investigators point to data. EMF readings are measurements, not interpretations. Audio analysis captured a real voice. Thermal imaging recorded actual temperature changes. Pattern recognition software identifies consistencies too precise for coincidence. The compassion pattern is particularly convincing. Diana appearing to those in pain, exactly matching her life's work, continuing her mission after death. This specificity argues against a generic ghost story. This is Diana's presence, not an archetypal haunting, but something personal, purposeful, unmistakably hers. Perhaps both sides hold partial truth. Grief is powerful, it creates vulnerability to experience. But vulnerability doesn't equal delusion. It might mean opening oneself to supernatural possibility that closed minds cannot perceive. Perhaps Althorp is genuinely a thin place, a location where the boundary between worlds grows permeable. 800 years of tragedy, violence, and death. The medieval curse giving way to modern haunting. Land saturated with spiritual energy accumulated across centuries. Diana's burial on this cursed ground, her spirit powerful and traumatized and purposeful, created perfect conditions for manifestation. The water element matters. The island surrounded by lake. Water traditionally binds spirits in folklore across cultures, but water also serves as conduit, a boundary between worlds. Diana is simultaneously trapped and free. She can appear on the island, throughout the estate, but cannot fully leave or rest. Her dual nature in death matches her life. Public Diana, compassionate, healing, graceful. Private Diana, suffering, trapped, desperate. Daytime phenomena bring comfort and peace. Nighttime phenomena bring crying and shadows. The same spirit, different aspects revealed depending on conditions. What does Diana need? Resolution of unfinished business. Connection with her sons, impossible from beyond the veil. Justice or understanding about her death. Release from the cycle of reliving trauma. Or perhaps acceptance of her new role as eternal comforter. Perhaps she's chosen this. Perhaps the haunting is intentional, the people's princess serving even in death. Althorp as her base, reaching those who suffer, not trapped committed. Althorp House, after 28 years, has adapted. Staff are trained to coexist with phenomena. Documentation protocols are established. Incidents are logged but normalized. Just another Diana night has become a common phrase among security guards who've worked there long enough. Visitors still report experiences. Some seek them intentionally, making pilgrimages hoping for contact. Others stumble into them unprepared, leaving shaken and changed. The estate's reputation has grown, England's most haunted stately home, but the haunting is specific, personal, not generic horror, movie scares. Diana's presence is melancholic, beautiful, purposeful. The island remains Diana's center. Fresh flowers appear without explanation. Visitors leave tributes, photographs, letters, toys for the mother who loved children. Some report feeling welcomed near the memorial. Others feel watched but protected. The lake itself seems alive. Still water at strange moments when wind should create ripples. Mist formations that seem intentional, gathering and dispersing with purpose. Reflections that show things not physically present on the shore. The house holds all of it. Medieval darkness beneath. Spencer tragedies layered through centuries. Diana's presence crowning it all. A palace of ghosts, with one reigning queen. October 2024. The latest documented incident. A young mother visiting with her infant daughter stood near the memorial temple. The baby suddenly stopped fussing and stared intently at empty space. The mother followed her daughter's gaze and saw nothing. But the baby was smiling, reaching out with tiny hands. Then the mother felt it. A presence beside her, invisible but undeniably real. Warmth, comfort, understanding. The baby laughed as if someone were playing with her. The mother began crying tears of relief, not sadness. A voice in her mind, not her ears. They're worth everything. Never forget that. The mother understood. Diana speaking about children, about what matters most, about priorities Diana learned too late. The experience lasted 3 minutes. Then the baby settled peacefully, the presence faded, and the mother left Althorp forever changed. 28 years later, Diana is still reaching out. For believers, proof of life after death, confirmation that love transcends mortality. Diana's spirit as evidence of eternal purpose, death not as ending but transformation. For skeptics, testament to Diana's cultural impact, a phenomenon given supernatural form by collective need, powerful but ultimately psychological. For those who've experienced it, no debate needed. Reality doesn't require external validation. Diana's presence is self-evident to them. Changed their lives, healed their wounds. Whether real in objective terms, doesn't matter, the effect is undeniably real. For Althorp House itself, repository of centuries of memory, container for Spencer family legacy, Diana's eternal home, where she played, suffered, and now remains. The haunting continues because she chooses it, or because she cannot leave, or because we won't let her go. Standing at the island's edge today, looking across water to her grave, what would Diana want us to know? Is she at peace or in torment? Reaching out or trapped? Healing others or seeking her own healing? The answer may be all of it. Death is not simple any more than life was. Diana in death remains Diana in life, complex, contradictory, compassionate, suffering, beautiful and broken, present and absent. The princess who became a ghost, the ghost who remains a princess, forever walking the halls of Althorp House, forever trying to tell us something, forever unable to fully break through, forever home. The footbridge still leads to the island, the lake still holds its secrets, the house still harbours its ghosts. And somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness, when the estate sleeps and the living rest, she walks. Diana Spencer, the eternal spirit of Althorp House, the woman who never truly left. Still reaching across the veil, still offering comfort to the broken-hearted, still, after all these years, trying to come home,